Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. William Good stood in his study, the amber liquid in his glass catching the late afternoon light. At 42, he'd built everything from nothing, a security consulting firm that now employed over 300 people across the country. His graying temples and the lines around his eyes told stories of 18-hour workdays and impossible decisions, but his sharp gaze remained undiminished. The house echoed with a silence he'd grown accustomed to over the past 3 years. Sarah's death had been sudden, a brain aneurysm that gave no warning, no chance for goodbye. One moment, she was laughing at the kitchen table, the next she was gone. The grief had nearly broken him, but Stephanie needed him. His daughter, 17 now, had been his anchor when he'd felt himself drowning. He walked to the mantel, where a photo of the three of them smiled back at him. Sarah's hand rested on Stephanie's shoulder, taken at Stephanie's middle school graduation. 4 years ago felt like yesterday and a lifetime simultaneously. "Dad!" Stephanie's voice called from the foyer. "I'm home." William smiled, setting down his glass. "Kitchen. I made your favorite." Stephanie Good had inherited her mother's dark hair and quick wit, but she had William's steel blue eyes and stubborn determination. She dropped her backpack on the counter, the same casual way she'd been doing since elementary school, and inhaled deeply. "Chicken parmesan? You're trying to butter me up." She grinned, but William noticed the shadow behind her smile, the way her eyes didn't quite meet his. Can't a father cook for his daughter without ulterior motives? He plated the food, studying her carefully. "How was school?" "Fine." The response came too quickly. "Same old stuff." They ate together, the conversation dancing around safe topics, her college applications, his upcoming business trip to Seattle, the neighbor's new dog. But William felt the distance growing between them like a fog rolling in, obscuring something he couldn't quite see. That night, lying in bed, William replayed the evening in his mind. Stephanie had been different for the past month. She'd stopped sharing stories about her friends, avoided his questions about her plans, jumped whenever her phone buzzed. As a man who'd built a career on reading people and identifying security threats, his instincts screamed that something was wrong. But he'd also learned the hard way that trust had to be earned and given. After Sarah's death, he and Stephanie had made a pact. No secrets, no lies. They'd survived by being honest with each other, even when it hurt. He wanted to honor that, to believe she'd come to him when she was ready. Still, the worry gnawed at him as sleep finally claimed him. Chapter 2, The First Warning. The Seattle conference started on a Tuesday. William had scheduled meetings back-to-back, leveraging connections, and closing a contract with a major tech company looking to overhaul their corporate security infrastructure. The deal alone would add $15 million to the firm's annual revenue. Wednesday evening, his phone rang. Kelly Jordan, their next-door neighbor for the past decade, her voice tight with concern. "William, I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know. I heard screaming coming from your house last night. Really loud screaming. I almost called the police, but then it stopped. Is Stephanie all right?" William's blood ran cold. "Screaming? What kind of screaming?" "It sounded like fear, William. Real fear. And I heard a man's voice too, though I couldn't make out the words. It was around 11. His mind raced. "Did you see anyone come or go?" "No, but there was a car parked down the street I didn't recognize. Dark sedan, maybe black or navy. It was gone by morning." William thanked her, his hand trembling as he ended the call. He immediately dialed Stephanie. "Hey, Dad." Her voice was artificially bright. "Steph," Mrs. Jordan called. "She said she heard screaming from the house last night." "What happened?" The pause stretched too long. "Oh, that. Yeah, sorry. I was watching a horror movie with Krista. We got really into it. You know how loud the sound system is. I should have warned the neighbors." Krista Lane was Stephanie's best friend since 5th grade. The explanation was plausible, but every fiber of Williams being rejected it. The sound system was good, but not that good. And Kelly had mentioned a man's voice. "Was anyone else there?" "Just us." Another pause. "Why?" "No reason. Just wanted to make sure you're safe. You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" "Of course, Dad. Always. Look, I gotta run. Love you." The call ended before he could respond. William sat in his hotel room, staring at the Seattle skyline, his reflection ghostly in the window. His daughter was lying to him. The question was why. He could confront her directly when he got home, demand answers, use the authority of fatherhood. But he'd seen where that approach led. Rebellious teenagers who learned to lie better, who pulled further away. And if someone was threatening her, pressuring her to keep quiet, pushing too hard might make things worse. No, William Good hadn't built a successful security firm by being reckless. He'd built it by being patient, strategic, and thorough, by gathering intelligence before acting. His laptop was already open. Within an hour, he'd ordered a complete hidden camera system, 6 discrete cameras with audio, motion-activated, feeding to a secure cloud server he could access from anywhere. They'd arrive before he returned home. By Thursday night, William was back in his study. Stephanie had gone to bed early, claiming homework exhaustion. He'd watched her carefully during dinner, the way she kept checking her phone, the nervous energy in her movements, how she flinched when a car door slammed outside. The cameras arrived Friday afternoon while Stephanie was at school. William spent 3 hours installing them. One in the living room, disguised in a bookshelf. One in the kitchen, hidden in a decorative plant. One covering the front door from inside the coat closet. One in the hallway upstairs. One in the garage. And one covering the backyard from a porch light fixture. He felt a pang of guilt. Surveillance in his own home felt like a betrayal of the trust he wanted to maintain with his daughter. But the alternative was worse. If someone was threatening Stephanie, if she was in danger, he needed to know. He needed to protect her, even if she wouldn't let him. That evening, Stephanie seemed more relaxed. They watched a movie together, shared a bowl of popcorn, laughed at the same jokes. For a moment, William wondered if he'd overreacted. Then her phone buzzed. Her face went pale. She excused herself quickly, disappeared into her room. William knew then he'd made the right call. Chapter 3. Calculated Patience. The next 2 weeks were torture. William watched Stephanie drift further away, her smiles becoming masks, her laughter hollow. But he didn't push. He maintained normalcy, kept their routines, gave her space while staying vigilantly present. He checked the camera feeds daily. For the most part, they showed exactly what he expected. Stephanie doing homework, watching TV, talking on the phone with Krista. Nothing unusual. Until the day Arthur Kuhn called. Arthur was William's oldest friend and the COO of his company. They'd served together in Army intelligence 15 years ago, before William had left to start his business. Arthur had joined him 3 years later, and together they'd built good security solutions into an industry leader. Willie, I need you in D.C. The Pentagon contract. They want to meet next week. This could be our biggest deal yet. William hesitated. The Pentagon had been courting them for 6 months, wanting a complete overhaul of their civilian facility security protocols. The contract was worth $40 million over 3 years. It was the kind of opportunity that could transform the company. How long? 4 days minimum. Maybe 5. William looked at the calendar. Stephanie would be alone. But this was also an opportunity. If something was going to happen, 4 days would give it time to unfold. I'll do it, he said. Book my flight. He told Stephanie that evening over dinner. D.C.? For that long. She tried to hide her reaction, but William saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, quickly replaced by forced enthusiasm. That's great, Dad. Really great. The Pentagon thing. Yeah, I'm sorry to leave you alone, but I'm 17, Dad. I can handle 4 days. Her smile was too bright. Besides, Krista can stay over if I get lonely. That's a good idea. I'll leave you money, and you have my credit card for emergencies. When do you leave? Sunday morning. Something crossed Stephanie's face. Calculation, William thought. Planning. That night, he prepared. He triple-checked the camera system, ensured the feeds were recording to redundant servers, set up alerts on his phone for any motion detection. Then he did something else. He called Ricardo Stevens, one of his senior security specialists. Rick, I need a favor. Personal, not company business. Name it. I need surveillance on my house while I'm in D.C. Discreet. Someone I trust. Ricardo didn't ask questions. Consider it done. I'll park down the street, rotate with Clyde. Nobody will know we're there. If you see anything concerning, anyone coming or going, anything unusual, you call me immediately. And Rick, this stays between us. Always, boss. Sunday morning, William hugged Stephanie goodbye. She clung to him slightly longer than usual, and he felt her trembling. You sure you're okay? He asked softly. I'm fine. Just be safe, okay? Always am. Love you, Steph. Love you too, Dad. The flight to D.C. was uneventful. William checked into his hotel, prepared for his Monday morning meeting, and waited. The Pentagon meetings went well, better than expected. By Tuesday afternoon, they had a preliminary agreement in principle. Arthur was ecstatic, but William's mind wasn't on contracts. It was on the camera feeds he was checking every 30 minutes. Tuesday evening, 8 o'clock, his phone buzzed. Motion detection in the living room. William opened a feed on his laptop. Stephanie was there, pacing nervously. Then the doorbell rang. His daughter approached the door slowly, reluctantly. Through the camera, William watched her open it. A man stood there, tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair graying at the temples, wearing expensive clothes but with predatory eyes. William didn't recognize him, but something about the man's posture, the way he moved, screamed danger. The audio picked up their conversation. Where is it? The man's voice was cultured, educated, but with an undercurrent of menace. I don't have it yet. I need more time. Stephanie's voice shook. We had a deal. Your father leaves for 4 days. You deliver by Tuesday. It's Tuesday. Please, I just need... The man grabbed Stephanie's arm. Not violently, but firmly enough that William saw his daughter wince. Listen to me very carefully. Your father has something that belongs to me. You're going to get it, or things are going to get much worse for you. Do you understand? Stephanie nodded, tears streaming down her face. 3 days. That's all you have left. And if you tell anyone, if you breathe a word to your father or the police, I'll make sure everyone knows what you did. Your college applications, your future, all of it gone. And that's before I start hurting people you care about. He released her arm and stepped back. 3 days, Stephanie. Don't disappoint me. The door closed. Stephanie collapsed against it, sobbing. William's hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold his laptop. Rage, pure, incandescent rage, flooded through him. But beneath it, his mind was already working, cataloging details, planning. He watched as Stephanie pulled herself together, wiped her eyes, and pulled out her phone. She typed something, stared at it, then deleted it. Tried again, deleted again. Finally, she threw the phone on the couch and buried her face in her hands. William immediately texted Ricardo. Anyone at the house? The response came back within seconds. Tall male, early 50s, left 3 minutes ago. Dark sedan, got the plates. Running them now. Follow him. I need to know where he goes. On it. William forced himself to think clearly. Someone was blackmailing his daughter, threatening her, using her to get something from him. But what? And who was this man? His phone rang. Ricardo. Boss, you're not going to believe this. The plates belong to a Dennis Devine. Want me to tell you who he is? The name hit William like a punch to the gut. I know exactly who he is. Memories flooded back. 15 years ago, Afghanistan, a mission that went wrong. Dennis Devine had been their translator, working for the contractor supplying intelligence support. But Dennis had been playing both sides, selling information to the enemy. William had been the one who'd discovered it, who'd reported it, who'd testified. Dennis had lost everything. His security clearance, his career, his reputation. He'd sworn revenge, but William had thought it was just empty threats from a broken man. Apparently, he'd been wrong. What do you need me to do? Ricardo asked. Keep following him. I want to know where he lives, where he goes, who he talks to. Everything. I'm coming home early. William, maybe we should call the police. This guy is threatening your daughter. Not yet. William's voice was hard as steel. I need to understand what he wants, what he has on Stephanie. If we bring in the police now, he might release whatever leverage he has. I need to be smart about this. He hung up and immediately called Arthur. Change of plans. I need to head back to Seattle tonight. Family emergency. Is everything okay? It will be. William booked the next flight home, his mind racing through scenarios, plans, contingencies. Dennis Devine wanted something from him, was using Stephanie as leverage. The question was what, and what had he done to ensure Stephanie's cooperation? As the plane took off, William pulled out his phone and opened a secure note-taking app. He began writing everything he remembered about Dennis Devine, his background, his skills, his connections, his weaknesses. If Dennis wanted to play games with his daughter, he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. William Good had spent 15 years building security systems designed to protect people from threats. But before that, he'd spent 8 years in military intelligence learning how to eliminate threats. Dennis Devine was about to learn the difference between the man William Good had become and the man he used to be. And that difference was going to cost him everything. Chapter 4. The Truth Revealed. William landed in Seattle at 2 in the morning. He didn't go home. Instead, he drove to a 24-hour diner and pulled up the camera feeds on his laptop, watching hours of footage, piecing together the pattern. Dennis had been coming to the house for 3 weeks, always when William was gone or at work late. The conversations were always the same: threats, demands, Stephanie's terrified compliance. But William needed to know what Dennis wanted, what he held over his daughter. At 5 a.m., Ricardo called. "Boss, I'm outside Devine's apartment. Uploaded his building layout to your secure server. Also, I found something interesting. He's not working alone. Who's with him? Woman, late 30s. Ran her face through our database. Brenda Sanderson, former Army intelligence analyst. Dishonorably discharged 8 years ago for selling classified information. She and Devine have been running scams together: blackmail, extortion, identity theft." William's jaw clenched. How many victims? At least a dozen we can confirm. Rich targets, people with reputations to protect. They find leverage, squeeze them dry, and move on. And Stephanie is just another mark to them. Looks that way. William thanked Ricardo and headed home. He arrived just as Stephanie was leaving for school, her eyes red from crying, her face pale. "Dad, you're home early." Pentagon talks wrapped up faster than expected. He hugged her, felt her stiffen slightly. "Everything okay here?" "Fine. Everything's fine." The lie was transparent now that he knew the truth. "Good. Listen, I need to catch up on some work today. We'll do dinner tonight, okay? Your choice." Relief flooded her face. "Okay, that sounds great." After she left, William went to his study and locked the door. Then he began making calls. First, to a digital forensics expert named Jeremy Clayton, another former colleague. "Jeremy, I need you to dig into someone for me. Dennis Devine. I need everything: financials, communications, associates, properties. Everything. How deep do you want me to go?" "All the way." "And Jeremy? This is off the books. If you find anything illegal, you document it but don't report it." "Not yet." "Understood. Give me 48 hours. Next, he called his lawyer, Lon Horn. "Lon, hypothetical situation. Someone is blackmailing my teenage daughter to get to me. If I were to handle this myself, rather than involve the police, what kind of legal exposure would I face?" Lon was quiet for a moment. "William, whatever you're thinking. Hypothetically, Lon. Hypothetically, you'd be looking at anything from harassment charges to assault to kidnapping, depending on what handling it means. My advice would be to call the police." "I know, but hypothetically, if I had evidence of their crimes, if I forced a confession, would that be admissible?" "Only if obtained legally. Anything coerced would be thrown out, and you'd face charges." "William, please tell me you're not planning something stupid. Just exploring options." "Thanks, Lon." William hung up and pulled up the camera footage again. This time, he focused on what Dennis had said. "Your father has something that belongs to me." What could Dennis think William had? The testimony from 15 years ago was public record, part of the military tribunal that had ended Dennis's career. There was nothing physical, no document or evidence that... Wait. William's blood ran cold as memory surfaced. The mission in Afghanistan, the evidence against Dennis. William had kept a backup. A flash drive with copies of the communications Dennis had sold. Proof beyond what had been presented at the tribunal. He'd kept it as insurance, locked it in his home safe, and then forgotten about it as years passed and the threat seemed to fade. If that information got out now, 15 years later, it wouldn't just ruin Dennis's reputation again. Some of those communications had named other people, contractors, government officials who'd been involved in the intelligence leaks. People who were now in positions of power. That flash drive was worth millions to the right buyers, or to the people who wanted to ensure it never surfaced. But how did Dennis know William still had it? And what did he have on Stephanie that made her willing to steal from her own father? William needed answers. He pulled out his phone and called Krista Lane's mother. Mrs. Lane? It's William Good. I'm sorry to bother you, but is Krista there? I need to ask her something about a school project. Oh, she's at school, William. Is everything all right? Yes, just some confusion about an assignment. Actually, I have a strange question. Was Krista at our house 2 weeks ago watching horror movies with Stephanie? The pause told him everything. No, Stephanie hasn't been over here or had Krista over in about a month, actually. I thought it was strange. They're usually inseparable. Is something wrong? No, just checking. Thank you, Mrs. Lane. So Stephanie had lied about the horror movie excuse. Another piece of the puzzle. That evening, William made Stephanie's favorite meal, lasagna, garlic bread, the works. They ate together, and he kept the conversation light, asking about college applications, her friends, normal father-daughter topics. After dinner, as they cleaned up, William said casually, "Hey, I need to grab something from the safe later. The combination's the same, right? I haven't changed it." Stephanie's hands froze on the dish she was washing. Why would you need to change it? No reason. Just double-checking. It's still your mom's birthday, right? She nodded, not meeting his eyes. William saw it clearly now. Dennis had somehow learned about the flash drive, discovered that Stephanie had access to the safe, and was forcing her to steal it. But he still didn't know what leverage Dennis held. That night, after Stephanie went to bed, William received an encrypted email from Jeremy Clayton. The subject line read, "You need to see this." The attached files were devastating. Dennis Devine and Brenda Sanderson had been running a sophisticated blackmail operation for 7 years. They targeted 18 people, accumulating over $12 million. Their method was always the same: identify wealthy individuals with secrets, find young people close to them who had vulnerabilities, exploit those vulnerabilities to turn them into unwitting accomplices. But what made William's hands shake was the file labeled Stephanie Good. 6 weeks ago, Stephanie had been at a party. A typical high school party, the kind William had grudgingly allowed because he trusted her judgment. But someone had drugged her drink. The screenshots showed photos, Stephanie unconscious, in compromising positions with multiple people, clearly staged but damning enough to destroy her reputation, her college prospects, her future. The photos were fake. The metadata analysis proved they'd been manipulated, Stephanie's face digitally placed on someone else's body. But to a casual observer, to college admissions boards, to her classmates and teachers, they'd look real enough to ruin her life. Dennis and Brenda had orchestrated the entire thing. They'd targeted Stephanie, researched her life, learned about the flash drive through means Jeremy was still tracing, and then set their trap. William sat in his study, tears streaming down his face, rage and heartbreak warring inside him. His daughter had been terrorized for weeks, carrying this burden alone, terrified and trapped by predators who saw her as nothing more than a tool. He thought of Sarah, of what she'd say. She'd tell him to call the police, to let the system work, to protect Stephanie through legal means. But William knew better. The photos were too convincing, the manipulation too sophisticated. Even proving they were fake would take time, and in the meantime, the damage would be done. Dennis would release them anyway if cornered, would ensure maximum harm on his way down. No, the police couldn't handle this. Not fast enough, not completely enough. William Good had protected people his entire life, first as a soldier, then as a security specialist. He'd always operated within the rules, trusted the system, believed in justice. But justice moved slowly, and his daughter didn't have time. Sometimes protecting the innocent meant getting your hands dirty. Sometimes it meant crossing lines. William opened his laptop and began planning. Not how to save himself from Dennis Devine, but how to completely destroy him. Chapter 5. The Strategist's Game. William spent the next day building his strategy like he was planning a military operation. He had multiple objectives: protect Stephanie, recover the fake photos, ensure Dennis and Brenda could never hurt anyone again, and do it all in a way that kept him and his daughter safe from legal consequences. The challenge was threading that needle. First, he needed more intelligence. He called Ricardo. I need you to bug Devine's apartment. Audio and video. Can you do it without leaving a trace? That's illegal, boss. Anything we hear would be inadmissible. I don't need it to be admissible. I needed to plan my next move. Ricardo was quiet. You're asking me to cross a line. I'm asking you to help me protect my daughter from the same kind of people who nearly got us all killed in Afghanistan. The same kind who've hurt at least 18 other families. Yes, it's a line, but I need to know what we're walking into. I'll have it done by tonight. Next, William called Bradley Cooper, a private investigator who specialized in corporate espionage cases. Brad, I need a complete profile on Brenda Sanderson. Where she goes, who she talks to, what she eats for breakfast. I need to know her routines, her habits, her weaknesses. How fast? 2 days. That's a rush job. It'll cost you. Money isn't an issue. That afternoon, William went to visit an old friend he hadn't seen in 5 years, Rodney Nolan. Rodney ran a computer security firm that occasionally operated in the gray areas of legality. They'd served together in Army intelligence, had saved each other's lives more than once. Willie Good, heard you were building an empire. What brings you to my humble operation? William laid out the situation, all of it. Stephanie, the blackmail, the fake photos, Dennis and Brenda's operation. Rodney's expression darkened. Those photos need to disappear. Not just the copies Dennis has, but every backup, every cloud storage, every device they might have touched. Can you do it? I can make it so those photos never existed. But I need access to their systems. Physical access. I can get you that. Then consider it done. But Willie, once I start, they'll know someone's onto them. You need to move fast after that. I will. That evening, Stephanie came to William's study. Her eyes were hollow, her face gaunt. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Dad, can we talk? William's heart ached. Of course. Come sit. She sat across from him, twisting her hands in her lap. I need to tell you something. Something bad. Okay, I'm listening. There's this man, I did something stupid, and now The words caught her throat, tears spilling down her cheeks. William moved around the desk and pulled her into his arms. I know, sweetheart. I know about Dennis Devine. She pulled back, shocked. Ow! I installed cameras in the house 2 weeks ago. I saw him threatening you, heard what he said, and I've been investigating him since. The cameras, you've been watching. Humiliation flooded her face. Only to keep you safe. Stephanie, you should have told me. He has photos. These horrible photos from a party. I don't remember anything from that night. I think someone drugged me. He said he'd send them to everyone, to my schools, to the police. He'd ruin my life, Dad. I didn't know what to do. The photos are fake. Digitally manipulated. I had them analyzed. Hope sparked in her eyes. Fake? Are you sure? Positive. But they're convincing enough to cause damage before we could prove it. That's why I haven't gone to the police yet. I need to handle this differently. What are you going to do? William chose his words carefully. I'm going to make sure Dennis Devine and his partner can never hurt you or anyone else again. But I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say. Can you do that? Stephanie nodded, wiping her tears. What do you need me to do? Dennis wants the flash drive from the safe. You're going to give it to him. What? But it's not the real one. I'm going to make a copy, alter it slightly, add a few things. When he takes it, it'll lead him right into a trap. But you have to act scared. Act like you're still under his control. Can you do that? I think so. Good. Because in 3 days, this all ends. Dennis came after my family. He's going to learn why that was the biggest mistake of his life. Chapter 6. The trap is set. Jeremy Clayton worked through the night, creating a perfect replica of the flash drive. But this version had additions, a hidden tracking program that would activate the moment Dennis accessed the files, pinpointing his location and recording everything on his screen. It also contained a virus that would infiltrate his system and copy every file he had, including backups of the fake photos. More importantly, Jeremy buried evidence in the fake drive, communications that would implicate Dennis and Brenda in multiple serious crimes, all documented and time-stamped. If Dennis tried to sell the drive or use it against William, he'd be incriminating himself. It's elegant, Jeremy said, handing over the drive. He thinks he's getting leverage, but he's actually downloading a prison sentence. Simultaneously, Ricardo had successfully bugged Dennis's apartment. The audio feeds revealed the full scope of his operation. Dennis and Brenda weren't just blackmailers. They were also running identity theft schemes, had connections to organized crime groups, and were wanted by the FBI for fraud in 3 states, though under different names. They'd been moving every few years, changing identities, staying ahead of law enforcement. The recordings also reveal their plan for after they got the flash drive. They were going to disappear, liquidate everything, flee the country with Stephanie's theft as their retirement fund, which meant they'd release the photos anyway, just to cover their tracks and punish Stephanie for the trouble. That confirmed what William already knew. The police couldn't help. By the time warrants were issued and Dennis was located, he'd be gone, and Stephanie's reputation would be destroyed. No, this had to be handled another way. Bradley Cooper's report on Brenda Sanderson revealed her weakness, a gambling addiction. She spent 3 nights a week at an underground poker game run by some very dangerous people. People who didn't take kindly to cheaters, and who had their own way of handling problems. William saw the opportunity. Friday afternoon, Dennis texted Stephanie, "Time's up. Tonight at midnight. Leave it in the mailbox." Stephanie showed William the message, her hands shaking. "Perfect," William said. "Here's what's going to happen." At 11:30 p.m., Stephanie placed the fake flash drive in the mailbox. William watched from his study as Dennis's car pulled up. A hand reached out, grabbed the package. The tracking program activated immediately. Dennis was heading back to his apartment. But William wasn't waiting there. He had other plans. While Dennis was at William's house, Rodney Nolan had broken into Dennis's apartment. In 15 minutes, he'd accessed every device, corrupted every backup of the fake photos, installed monitoring software, and copied every file Dennis had on all his victims. At the same time, Bradley Cooper was at the underground poker game where Brenda Sanderson was losing badly. He struck up a conversation, bought her a drink, mentioned he had a business opportunity for someone with her particular skills. The opportunity was fabricated, but it would keep her occupied and away from Dennis for the next 3 hours. At 1 a.m., William received confirmation from both Rodney and Bradley. The photos were gone. Every digital trace eliminated. Dennis's files were copied. Every victim documented. Every crime recorded. It was time for Phase 2. William sent an anonymous email to the FBI's cybercrime division. The email contained everything: Dennis and Brenda's real identities, their location, their crimes against all 18 victims, and the evidence files Jeremy had recovered. But William held back the files on Stephanie, keeping those for himself. Then he sent a second email, this one to the head of the organized crime group that ran the poker game. The message was simple. Brenda Sanderson had been skimming money from their games for 6 months. Attached were bank records, real ones Jeremy had found, showing transfers that coincidentally matched the timeline of her games. She hadn't actually been stealing from them, but the evidence looked convincing enough to raise questions. Dangerous questions. Phase 2 was about turning their own tactics against them. Dennis and Brenda had built their lives on leverage, on threats, on making people afraid. Now they'd experienced that same fear. But William wasn't done. Phase 3 was personal. At 3 a.m., Dennis Devine's phone rang. An unknown number. He answered groggily. "Hello, Dennis. It's William Good. We need to talk." William heard the panic in the silence that followed. Then, "I don't know what you're talking about." "The flash drive you stole from my mailbox 3 hours ago. The one you think gives you leverage over me. Check it. I'll wait." The sound of a laptop opening, keys clicking. Then Dennis's sharp intake of breath. "What did you do?" Dennis's voice was tight with rage. "I gave you exactly what you asked for, plus a few extras. Right now, that drive is recording everything on your screen, copying every file you have, and transmitting it all to a secure server, along with your location. And Dennis? The FBI received an interesting package tonight. So did some friends of yours in the poker game Brenda frequents. You son of a... I'm not finished. You came after my daughter. You terrorized her, manipulated her, tried to destroy her future. For that, I'm going to destroy you. But I'm going to give you one chance, to make this right. What do you want? Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., you and Brenda are going to walk into the Seattle FBI office. You're going to confess to everything. Every victim, every crime. You're going to provide evidence and testimony against anyone else involved in your operation. And you're going to include a sworn statement that the photos of my daughter were completely fabricated, that she was an innocent victim of your blackmail scheme. And if I don't, then the people you stole from in the poker game are going to find you before the FBI does. And I'm going to make sure every person you ever victimized knows your real name and where you are. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for someone to take revenge. Is that really how you want to live? Dennis was quiet for a long moment. You can't prove any of this would hold up in court. I don't need to. I just need to make your life a living hell. And unlike you, I have the resources, the connections, and the motivation to do it for the rest of your miserable existence. So ask yourself, do you really want to go to war with me? Because I promise you, it's a war you'll lose. The call ended. William sat back in his chair, adrenaline coursing through him. It wasn't over yet. Dennis might still try to run, might still try to strike back. But William had one more card to play. He'd recorded the entire conversation, and he'd made sure Dennis's threats, his implicit admission of the blackmail, were all captured clearly. If Dennis didn't turn himself in, William had enough to bury him. And if Dennis did turn himself in, Stephanie was safe. Either way, the game was over. William had won. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. Dennis Devine didn't sleep that night. William knew because the tracking software showed him frantically trying to access backups, searching for the photos, growing more desperate with each failure. At 6 a.m., Dennis made a call. Brenda answered, her voice thick with sleep. "We have a problem," Dennis said. The conversation that followed confirmed everything. Brenda revealed that she'd been approached by someone asking uncomfortable questions about the poker games. Dennis realized they were trapped. William had outmaneuvered them at every turn. But at 7 a.m., instead of heading to the FBI, Dennis made a different call. To Kelvin Curry, a former associate who specialized in violence. "I need you to send a message," Dennis said. "William Good, Seattle. I'll pay $50,000. William, listening to the audio feed, felt ice run through his veins. Dennis wasn't surrendering. He was doubling down, trying to intimidate William into backing off by threatening violence. It was the confirmation William needed that Dennis Devine was beyond redemption. He immediately called Ricardo. "Dennis just put a hit out on me. Contact Kelvin Curry for 50 grand. I know Kelvin. Low-level enforcer, more bark than bite, but still dangerous. What do you want me to do? Kelvin owes me a favor from the Sanderson case 2 years ago. Call it in. I want to know when and where he's supposed to meet Dennis." 20 minutes later, Ricardo called back. "Kelvin's meeting Dennis at a warehouse on the south side at noon. He's bringing the money in cash." "Perfect. Ricardo, I need you to do something else. Call Detective Phil Nelson at Seattle PD. Tell him you have information about a weapons deal going down at that warehouse. Anonymous tip. Make sure they have officers there by 11:30. Boss, what are you planning?" "I'm planning to give Dennis exactly what he deserves." At 10 a.m., William drove to Stephanie's school and pulled her out, claiming a family emergency. She looked terrified. "Is it him? Is he coming after us?" "Not anymore, but I need you somewhere safe while I finish this. We're going to Uncle Arthur's house. You're going to stay there until I call you." "Dad, what are you going to do?" William looked at his daughter, seeing Sarah in her eyes, seeing the innocence Dennis had tried to corrupt. "I'm going to make sure you're safe. Forever." He dropped Stephanie at Arthur's house with instructions not to leave until he returned. Arthur didn't ask questions, just put a hand on William's shoulder and said, "Whatever you need." At 11 a.m., William drove to the warehouse. It was abandoned, perfect for an illegal exchange. He parked a block away and walked to a vantage point where he could see the entrance. At 11:30, police cars arrived, parking discreetly around the perimeter. Phil Nelson was a good cop, and he took anonymous tips about weapons deals seriously, especially in an area known for criminal activity. At 11:45, Dennis's car pulled up. He got out, carrying a briefcase. He looked haggard, desperate. Brenda was with him, her face tight with fear. At 11:50, another car arrived. Kelvin Curry stepped out, looking around nervously. And that's when the police moved in. Police. Hands in the air. The scene erupted in chaos. Dennis tried to run, but officers tackled him. The briefcase spilled open, cash scattering across the pavement. Kelvin immediately put his hands up, smart enough not to resist. William watched from his vantage point as Phil Nelson arrested Dennis Devine for solicitation of murder. The cash, the recorded conversation from Kelvin's wire, which Ricardo had arranged, and Dennis's own desperate attempts to flee. It was all enough for charges. But William had one more piece to play. He walked down to the scene, showing his ID to the officers. Detective Nelson? I'm William Good. I believe I'm the intended target of this hit. Phil Nelson's eyes widened. Mr. Good? You're the one who called this in. Indirectly, Dennis Devine has been blackmailing my daughter and threatening my family. I have evidence of his crimes, recordings, documents, everything you need. May I speak with you privately? 20 minutes later, in Phil Nelson's car, William laid out everything. The flash drive, the blackmail operation, the 18 victims, the fake photos of Stephanie. He provided the recordings of Dennis's threats, the evidence Jeremy had compiled, all of it. This is extensive, Phil said, flipping through the documents on William's laptop. Why didn't you come to us earlier? Because I needed to protect my daughter first. The photos Dennis created were convincing enough to ruin her life before we could prove them fake. I needed to eliminate that threat before involving law enforcement. Phil nodded slowly. And the FBI? I'm seeing reports that they received similar information last night. Anonymous tip from a concerned citizen. Mr. Good, you're walking a very fine line here. Some of these methods were necessary to protect my child, detective. Everything I did was to gather evidence and ensure my daughter's safety. Dennis Devine threatened to kill me to cover his tracks. He's a dangerous criminal who's hurt dozens of people. Now you have him. Phil was quiet for a moment. The solicitation charge will stick. With the evidence you're providing, we can add blackmail, extortion, fraud. He's looking at 20 years minimum. And my daughter? The photos. With your evidence showing they're fake and part of a blackmail scheme, there's no case against her. She was a victim, not a perpetrator. Relief flooded through William. Thank you, detective. Thank your daughter for having a father who cares enough to protect her. Most kids aren't that lucky. Chapter 8, The Reckoning. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind. Dennis and Brenda were formally charged with multiple counts of blackmail, extortion, fraud, solicitation of murder, and identity theft. The FBI's investigation uncovered their entire operation, including the 18 victims across 7 states. William provided testimony, always careful to frame his actions as protective measures taken by a concerned father gathering evidence. The illegal aspects, the bugs, the hacking, the manipulation, he attributed to anonymous sources and independent investigation. It helped that Dennis, facing overwhelming evidence and the possibility of life in prison, started talking. He tried to cut a deal, offering testimony against other criminals he'd worked with. In the process, he confirmed everything William had claimed: the blackmail of Stephanie, the fake photos, the threats. The photos themselves were analyzed by FBI digital forensics. The manipulations were obvious to experts, and Dennis's admission sealed it. They were fabricated, designed to blackmail an innocent teenager. Brenda Sanderson, facing charges both from the FBI and pressure from the poker game operators, flipped on Dennis completely. She provided evidence of crimes he'd committed alone, testified to his violence and threats, painted herself as another victim of his manipulation. William didn't buy it, but it helped the case. By the end of the week, both Dennis and Brenda were denied bail. They'd spend the next months awaiting trial in custody. But William wasn't satisfied yet. Dennis's crimes had ruined lives, stolen millions, destroyed families. 20 years in prison wasn't enough. That's when Jeremy Clayton came to him with an interesting discovery. Willie, remember those communications Dennis was selling in Afghanistan? The ones on the original flash drive? Yeah. Some of those people he implicated are still active, still in positions of power, still very interested in making sure that information never surfaces. And they have long memories. What are you saying? I'm saying word might reach certain parties that Dennis Devine is in custody and might be willing to testify about other matters. Old matters. Afghanistan matters. And those parties might be very interested in ensuring his silence. William met Jeremy's eyes. That's a dangerous game. It's also justice. Dennis destroyed lives. He threatened your daughter. He was willing to have you killed. Maybe he deserves to face consequences from all the people he's wronged, not just the legal system. William thought of Stephanie, of the terror in her eyes, of the weeks she'd spent under Dennis's thumb. He thought of the other victims, the lives ruined, the families destroyed. Do what you think is right, William said finally. But I can't be involved. Jeremy nodded and left. 2 weeks later, William read a news article about Dennis Devine being found dead in his cell. Official cause, suicide. But the guards reported no signs of depression, and the medical examiner found inconsistencies. The investigation went nowhere. Dennis had too many enemies, too many people with motives. Eventually, it was ruled a probable suicide, and the case was closed. Brenda Sanderson took a plea deal, 15 years for her cooperation. She'd be old when she got out, her life effectively over. William felt no satisfaction from Dennis's death, but he felt no guilt either. The man had threatened his daughter, had tried to have William killed, had destroyed countless lives. Whether he died by his own hand or someone else's, it was a consequence of his own actions. Stephanie, meanwhile, was healing. The nightmares faded. Her smile returned. She went back to being the bright, hopeful girl she'd been before Dennis Devine entered their lives. Chapter 9. New Dawn. 3 months after Dennis's death, Stephanie received acceptance letters from every school she'd applied to. The fake photos had never surfaced, had never touched her reputation. She was free. One evening, father and daughter sat on their back porch, watching the sunset. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Stephanie said quietly. "Anything. What did you do?" "Really do. I know it was more than just gathering evidence." William was silent for a long moment. He'd always promised himself he'd never lie to his daughter. "I did what I had to do to protect you. Some of it was legal. Some of it was in a gray area. And I don't regret any of it." "Did you kill him?" "No, I didn't. But I made sure the right people knew about him, knew what he'd done." After that, he shrugged. The world has a way of correcting itself. Stephanie nodded slowly. "I'm not sure how I feel about that." "That's okay. You don't have to know how you feel about it. You just have to know that I love you, and I'll always protect you, no matter what. Even if it means crossing lines. Even then, there are laws, and there's justice, Steph. Sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes they're not. I did what I thought was right to keep you safe. That's all any father can do." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you. For everything. For not giving up on me when I couldn't tell you the truth. For believing in me. Always, sweetheart. Always." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon. Later that night, William received an email from Ricardo. The subject line read, "Thought you should know." The email contained a news article about the FBI busting a massive fraud ring that had victimized over 50 people. The investigation had started with evidence recovered from Dennis Devine's files, leading to the arrest of 12 people across 4 states. All 18 of Dennis and Brenda's victims had been notified. Most of the money had been recovered. Lives were being rebuilt. William closed his laptop and walked to the mantel, looking at the photo of Sarah, Stephanie, and himself from 4 years ago. They looked happy, innocent, unaware of the darkness that would come. "I hope I did right," he said to Sarah's image. "I know you'd have wanted me to take the legal route, but I couldn't risk it. I couldn't risk losing her." Sarah smiled back at him from the photograph, frozen in that moment of perfect happiness. William Good had built his life on protecting people. He'd crossed lines he'd never thought he'd cross, had become someone he'd never thought he'd be. But his daughter was safe. The bad people were gone. Justice, in its own way, had been served. In the end, that's all that mattered. A week later, Stephanie chose her college, a prestigious school across the country. William helped her prepare, packed boxes, pretended his heart wasn't breaking at the thought of her leaving. The day he dropped her off at college, she hugged him fiercely in her dorm parking lot. "I love you, Dad. Thank you for everything." "I love you too, Steph." Go make your mother proud." She pulled back, wiping tears. "She'd be proud of you too, for protecting me, for doing whatever it took." William smiled, though his own eyes were wet. "I hope so." He drove home alone, the house emptier than it had ever been. But there was peace in the silence now. No more threats, no more fear, no more shadows. Dennis Devine had tried to destroy William Good's family. Instead, he'd reminded William of what he was capable of, what lengths he'd go to for the people he loved. Some people called it justice. Some called it revenge. William called it being a father. And as he sat in his study that night, looking at the photo of his wife and daughter, he knew he'd do it all again without hesitation. Because protecting family wasn't just about following rules. It was about doing whatever necessary to keep them safe, even if it meant becoming the monster someone else's nightmares. Even if it meant living with the consequences for the rest of your life. Some lines, once crossed, change you forever. William Good had crossed those lines, and he'd do it again in a heartbeat, because that's what love meant. That's what family meant. And nothing, not laws, not morality, not consequences, would ever change that. The end. Epilogue. 5 years later, Stephanie graduated top of her class. She'd gone on to law school, inspired to help other victims of blackmail and extortion. She turned her trauma into purpose. William had sold his security company, retiring at 48. He spent his time volunteering, teaching self-defense classes to teenagers, helping families protect themselves from predators. He never talked about what happened with Dennis Devine. The details remained buried, known only to a few trusted friends who'd helped him. But sometimes, late at night, he wondered about the path he'd chosen, whether there had been another way, whether he'd made the right call. Then he'd see Stephanie, confident, happy, thriving, and the doubts would fade. He'd made the only choice a father could make. He protected his child, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The House of Broken Things. Dalton Hall stood in the doorway of his own kitchen, watching his family eat dinner, and felt like a stranger in his own life. At the head of the oak table sat his wife Marlene, cutting precise pieces of perfectly seasoned ribeye steak for their daughter Angel. Across from them, their son Terry hunched over a paper plate containing what looked like leftover scraps from yesterday's meal: cold beans, a piece of stale bread, and some congealed gravy. The contrast wasn't subtle. It never was in the Hall household. Dalton had built this house with his own hands 15 years ago, back when he believed in the American dream of family and prosperity. The construction business had been good to him, good enough to afford the sprawling ranch house on 5 acres outside Millbrook, good enough to give his family everything they could want. But somewhere along the way, everything had gone wrong. "Terry, sit up straight." Marlene's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Just because you're eating slop doesn't mean you have to look like a pig." 8-year-old Terry straightened his shoulders but kept his eyes on his plate. Dalton noticed the boy's hands were shaking slightly, a tremor that had developed over the past year as the household dynamics had shifted. "Mommy, can I have seconds?" Angel asked, her voice sweet and musical. At 10, she had inherited Marlene's sharp features and calculating intelligence, along with something else, a casual cruelty that seemed to come as naturally as breathing. "Of course, sweetheart. There's plenty for my special girl." Dalton watched as Marlene served Angel another generous portion while Terry's plate remained nearly empty. This had become the new normal over the past 18 months, ever since Marlene's parents had moved into the guest house on their property. Cornelius and Dolores Fitzpatrick had arrived under the pretense of helping with childcare, while Dalton worked long hours on construction sites. What they'd actually brought was a toxic philosophy about bloodlines, worthiness, and the natural order of things that had poisoned his family from within. "Daddy's home," Angel chirped, finally noticing Dalton in the doorway. But her smile was perfunctory, practiced, the kind reserved for someone whose presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. "Hey, princess," Dalton said, forcing warmth into his voice. "How was school?" "Wonderful." Mrs. Patterson said my essay about family values was the best in the class. Grandpa Cornelius helped me write it. Dalton's jaw tightened. He could imagine what kind of family values Cornelius had helped her articulate. "That's great, honey. Terry, how about you? How was your day?" Terry's head snapped up, surprise flickering across his face. It had been weeks since anyone had asked him about his day. "It was okay, Dad. We learned about fractions and math, and I got all the problems right." "Fractions?" Marlene scoffed. "How perfectly appropriate. Terry's always been good with broken pieces." Angel giggled at her mother's joke, and Dalton felt something cold settle in his stomach. When had his daughter learned to laugh at cruelty? The back door opened, and Cornelius Fitzpatrick entered without knocking, a liberty he'd taken upon himself since moving onto the property. At 72, he carried himself with the bearing of old Southern aristocracy, despite the fact that his family had lost their plantation fortune 3 generations ago. What remained was pride, prejudice, and a toxic obsession with bloodline purity. "Evening, Dalton," Cornelius said, his tone suggesting he was addressing hired help rather than the man who owned the house. "I trust the honest labor went well today." The phrase honest labor was always delivered with just enough condescension to make it clear what Cornelius thought of men who worked with their hands. "It went fine," Dalton replied evenly. He learned not to rise to the bait, though every instinct screamed at him to put the old man in his place. Dolores Fitzpatrick shuffled in behind her husband, a woman who had spent so many years nursing grievances that bitterness had carved permanent lines into her face. She surveyed the dinner table with the critical eye of a general inspecting troops. "Angel, darling, you need to eat more vegetables," she said, adding another helping of asparagus to the girl's plate. "Growing girls need proper nutrition." Her eyes flicked to Terry's meager portion and stayed there for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Grandma, why does Terry always get different food?" Angel asked with the innocent curiosity of childhood. Dalton tensed, waiting to see how the adults would handle this question. This was the moment someone should explain fairness, equality, the importance of treating family members with love and respect. Instead, Marlene reached over and brushed Angel's hair back from her face. "Because different people deserve different things, sweetheart. Some people are special, and some people are—" She glanced at Terry with barely concealed distaste. "Ordinary. But we're both your kids," Terry said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. Dalton watched his wife's face harden, saw Cornelius's eyes narrow with something that might have been amusement. "Are you questioning your mother?" Dolores asked, her voice sharp as broken glass. Terry's eyes widened with fear. "No, ma'am. You just what?" Marlene demanded. "You just think you deserve the same treatment as Angel? You think you're entitled to the same privileges?" Dalton stepped forward. "Marlene, he's 8 years old. He's old enough to understand his place," Cornelius interjected. "The boy needs to learn that equality is a myth perpetuated by weak minds. Some are born to lead, others to follow. Some deserve the finest cuts of meat, others." He gestured dismissively at Terry's plate. "Others get what they earn. What has an 8-year-old done to earn scraps?" Dalton's voice was dangerously quiet. "He was born," Dolores said simply. "Sometimes that's enough." The cryptic comment hung in the air like smoke, and Dalton felt pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed beginning to click into place. The favoritism, the casual cruelty, the way Marlene had changed after her parents arrived, it all pointed to something deeper and more disturbing than simple preference. "I think it's time Terry went to bed," Marlene announced. "He looks tired." It was 7:30. Angel regularly stayed up until 9. Terry slid off his chair without protest, his small frame seeming to shrink even further. As he passed Dalton, the boy looked up with eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. "Good night, Dad." "Good night, son." Dalton watched Terry disappear down the hallway, then turned back to find 4 pairs of eyes studying him with varying degrees of calculation and contempt. Is there a problem, Dalton? Marlene asked, her tone challenging. Dalton looked at his wife, really looked at her, and tried to find some trace of the woman he'd married. Marlene had always been ambitious, always wanted more than what life had given her, but she'd also been capable of warmth, laughter, love. The woman sitting at his table now was a stranger wearing his wife's face. No problem, he said finally. I need a shower. As Dalton headed for the bathroom, he could hear them resuming their conversation behind him, voices low and conspiratorial. Angel's laughter rang out again, bright and cruel, and he realized that his daughter was being molded into something monstrous right under his nose. In the bathroom, Dalton stared at himself in the mirror and tried to figure out when he'd lost control of his own family. He was 6'3", 230 pounds of muscle and bone, hardened by years of construction work and military service before that. He'd faced down armed insurgents in Afghanistan and never backed down from a fight in his life. But somehow, he'd allowed his own household to be taken over by poisonous influences who were destroying his son's spirit and corrupting his daughter's soul. The man in the mirror stared back at him with cold gray eyes that had seen too much death and dealt out enough violence to know exactly what he was capable of when pushed too far. Dalton Hall had spent the last 18 months trying to be reasonable, trying to keep the peace, trying to believe that things would get better if he just worked harder and provided more. But as he listened to his family's laughter echoing from the kitchen, laughter that excluded one member entirely, he realized that reason and peace were luxuries he could no longer afford. Some problems required more permanent solutions. Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. The sound that woke Dalton at 2:17 a.m. was unlike anything he'd ever heard. A scream of pure agony that cut through the night like a rusty blade. He was out of bed and moving before his conscious mind caught up, military training kicking in as he sprinted down the hallway toward the source of the sound. What he found in the kitchen would haunt him for the rest of his life. Terry sat on the floor, cradling his right hand against his chest, blood streaming from between his fingers. Marlene stood over him, holding a carpenter's hammer, her face twisted with rage. Angel watched from the doorway, her expression a mixture of fascination and satisfaction. What the hell happened? Dalton roared, dropping to his knees beside his son. The boy got greedy, Marlene said, her voice unnaturally calm. Decided he deserved leftovers from Angel's steak dinner. Dalton gently pulled Terry's hand away from his chest and felt his stomach lurch. The boy's ring finger was bent at an impossible angle, clearly broken, with bone visible through torn skin. You broke his finger? With a hammer. Useless boys don't deserve fingers, Marlene replied, setting the hammer on the counter with deliberate precision. Maybe now he'll remember to keep his hands to himself. Behind them, Dalton heard the sound of slow applause. Cornelius had entered the kitchen, still in his pajamas, but wide awake, as if he'd been expecting this show. Excellent lesson, daughter, he said approvingly. The boy needed to understand consequences. Dolores appeared beside him, her cold eyes studying Terry's injury with clinical detachment. Trash gets scraps, she said, spitting the words like a curse. When you reach above your station, you get reminded of your place. Dalton looked up at these people, his wife, his in-laws, even his daughter, and saw something that made his blood run cold. There was no remorse, no shock, no human compassion. They were looking at Terry like he was an animal that had been properly disciplined. Terry, we need to get you to the hospital, Dalton said, scooping his son into his arms. Is that necessary? Marlene asked. It's just a finger. Dalton stared at her with such naked fury that she actually took a step back. You broke our 8-year-old son's finger with a hammer because he was hungry, and you're asking if medical attention is necessary. Our son, Cornelius's voice carried a note of amusement. How presumptuous. The words hit Dalton like a physical blow. He looked from Cornelius to Marlene, seeing something pass between them, a look of shared knowledge that excluded him completely. What did you just say? Angel stepped forward, her young face bright with the excitement of being included in adult secrets. Grandpa Cornelius says Terry isn't really your son, Daddy. Mommy had him with someone else before you got married. That's why he doesn't look like us, and why he doesn't deserve the same things I do. The kitchen went silent, except for Terry's quiet whimpering. Dalton looked down at the boy in his arms, really looked at him, and saw what he'd been blind to for 8 years. Terry had dark hair where the rest of the family was blonde, brown eyes instead of blue, olive skin that never seemed to match either parent. "Is it true?" Dalton asked Marlene, his voice barely above a whisper. Marlene's chin lifted defiantly. "What does it matter? You signed a birth certificate. Legally, he's your responsibility. Legally. Not actually. No, not actually." Dalton felt something fundamental break inside his chest. Not his heart, that had been damaged beyond repair months ago. This was something deeper, something that had to do with identity and belonging and the basic human need to know where you came from. Who's his father? Does it matter? Some construction worker I was seeing before we met. Probably dead by now, knowing the type. The casual cruelty in her voice, the complete dismissal of Terry's biological father, the way she spoke about it in front of the boy himself. It all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity for Dalton. These people weren't just cruel. They were evil. "Terry," Dalton said softly, "we're going to the hospital now. And while we're there, we're going to have a long talk about some things." "Are you going to send me away?" Terry asked, his voice small and scared. Dalton looked into those brown eyes. Eyes that weren't his but belonged to a child who had called him daddy for 8 years, and felt his resolve harden into something unbreakable. "No, son, I'm not going to send you away. But some other people might need to find new places to live. You can't throw us out," Dolores snarled. "This is our daughter's house." "Actually," Dalton said, standing with Terry still in his arms, "this is my house. Built with my money on land I bought with a mortgage in my name. And I'm starting to think it's time for some spring cleaning." Cornelius stepped forward, his face flushed with indignation. "You forget yourself, boy. Marlene is a Fitzpatrick. We don't get thrown out by hired help." Dalton set Terry down gently and turned to face Cornelius. The old man was tall, but Dalton was taller. Cornelius had presence, but Dalton had something more dangerous, the kind of controlled violence that came from years of fighting real enemies in real wars. "Let me explain something to you, old man," Dalton said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that made smart people back down. "You've been living in my house, eating my food, and poisoning my family for 18 months. You've turned my wife into a monster and my daughter into a sociopath. And now you've convinced my wife to break a child's finger with a hammer because he was hungry." Dalton took a step closer, and Cornelius involuntarily backed up. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm taking Terry to the hospital. When we get back, I want you and your charming wife off my property. Permanently. And if we refuse?" Dolores asked, trying to sound defiant, but not quite managing it. Dalton's smile was terrifying in its complete lack of warmth. "Ma'am, I've killed people for a lot less than what you've done to that boy. You really don't want to test my patience." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Marlene stepped between them, her face pale but determined. "You can't threaten my parents, Dalton. I won't allow it." "Then maybe you should pack your bags too." Marlene's eyes widened with shock. "You can't be serious. I'm your wife. This is my home. Is it? Because from where I stand, it looks like you've chosen your side, and it's not mine." Dalton picked Terry up again and headed for the door. As he reached the threshold, he turned back to find 4 pairs of eyes watching him with varying degrees of rage and calculation. "By the way," he said conversationally, "Terry might not be my biological son, but he's more family to me than any of you have ever been. And I protect my family." The drive to the hospital gave Dalton time to think, and what he thought about was revenge. Not the hot, impulsive kind that led to mistakes and regrets, but the cold, methodical kind that his military training had taught him to plan and execute with surgical precision. As Terry dozed fitfully in the passenger's seat, his broken finger wrapped in a makeshift splint, Dalton began to formulate a plan that would make the people who had tortured his son understand exactly what real cruelty looked like. They wanted to play games with children's lives. They wanted to break bones and crush spirits. Dalton was about to teach them what those things felt like when they happened to adults. And unlike them, he wouldn't stop at one broken finger. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm. The emergency room at Millbrook General was nearly empty at 3 in the morning, which meant Terry was seen immediately. Dr. Lisa Shannon, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and gentle hands, examined the boy's injury with the careful attention of someone who had seen too many suspicious wounds over the years. "This is a complex fracture," she told Dalton as Terry dozed under mild sedation. The finger was struck with significant force, enough to shatter the bone in multiple places. "It's going to require surgery and several weeks of healing." Dalton nodded, watching his son's peaceful face. Under the influence of pain medication, Terry looked even younger than his 8 years. "Doctor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Dr. Shannon's expression grew wary. "What is it? Have you ever seen an injury like this from an accident? Something that could happen during normal childhood play?" The doctor was quiet for a long moment, studying Dalton's face as if trying to gauge his intentions. "Mr. Hall, in my 15 years of emergency medicine, I've seen thousands of childhood injuries. Falls, sports accidents, playground mishaps, all kinds of things. But this," she gestured toward Terry's splinted hand, "this is consistent with deliberate trauma. Someone struck this child's finger with a heavy object, probably a hammer or similar tool." "That's what I thought. Mr. Hall, I'm required by law to report suspected child abuse. I'll need to contact Child Protective Services and file a police report." Dalton felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. "I understand. Do what you need to do." As Dr. Shannon left to make her calls, Dalton sat beside Terry's bed and began making plans. His phone had been buzzing with text messages from Marlene, increasingly frantic demands to know where he was and when he was coming home. He ignored them all. Instead, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. Leland Collins had been Dalton's commanding officer in Afghanistan, and after retirement, he'd started a private security firm that specialized in what he called unconventional problem solving, the kind of work that left no paper trails and asked no uncomfortable questions. The phone rang twice before Leland's familiar gravelly voice answered. "Jesus, Dalton, it's 3 in the morning. Someone better be dead." "Not yet," Dalton replied. "But I need a favor." "What kind of favor?" "The kind you're good at. I need complete background checks on 4 people, and I need them fast. I'm talking deep dives, financial records, criminal history, medical records, psychological profiles, the works." "That's not exactly legal. Since when has that stopped you?" Leland chuckled. "Fair point. What's this about?" Dalton looked at Terry's sleeping form and felt his resolve harden. "Someone hurt my boy. I want to know everything about them before I hurt them back." "Understood. Send me the names and details. You'll have everything within 48 hours. "Thanks, Lee. I owe you one. You've owed me several since Kandahar. Don't worry about it." As Dalton ended the call, Dr. Shannon returned with a police officer and a social worker in tow. Officer Robert Fuentes was young, probably early 30s, with the alert posture of someone who took his job seriously. The social worker, Grace Kane, looked like she'd seen every form of human ugliness imaginable and had developed protective calluses over her emotions. "Mr. Hall," Officer Fuentes began, "Dr. Shannon has informed us of the nature of your son's injury. We need to ask you some questions." For the next hour, Dalton told him everything. The favoritism, the emotional abuse, the hammer incident, the revelation about Terry's parentage. He held nothing back, painting a picture of systematic cruelty that made both professionals visibly uncomfortable. "Where are the other family members now?" Grace asked. "At my house. When I left, they were discussing whether Terry's injury was sufficient punishment or if more was needed." Officer Fuentes made notes in his report. "We'll need to interview all of them, starting with your wife and daughter. My wife is the one who broke Terry's finger. My daughter watched and laughed. My in-laws encouraged it." Grace leaned forward. "Mr. Hall, based on what you're telling us, we're going to need to remove Terry from the home environment until this investigation is complete." "No." The word came out with such finality that both professionals looked up in surprise. "I'm sorry," Grace said. "I said no. Terry isn't going into foster care. He's staying with me. Mr. Hall, we have to consider the child's safety. His safety is my responsibility. The people who hurt him will be removed from my house, not the other way around." Officer Fuentes cleared his throat. Sir, it's not that simple. We have protocols. Your protocols failed to protect him for 8 years, Dalton interrupted. My methods will be more effective. The threat in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. Grace and Officer Fuentes exchanged glances. Mr. Hall, Grace said carefully, we understand you're angry, but we need to handle this through proper channels. Of course, but while you're handling things through proper channels, I'll be handling them through more direct ones. Before either professional could respond, Dalton's phone rang. Unknown number. Yeah. Mr. Hall? This is Clark Fisher, attorney at law. I represent Cornelius and Dolores Fitzpatrick. Dalton felt a cold smile spread across his face. The old bastards had already lawyered up. That was fast. What can I do for you, counselor? My clients are concerned about the welfare of Angel Fitzpatrick Hall. They're requesting immediate custody pending a full investigation of this alleged abuse situation. Angel Fitzpatrick Hall? Is that what we're calling her now? My clients believe the child would be safer in their care, given your obvious instability and history of violence. Dalton stepped outside the hospital room, leaving the door open so Grace and Officer Fuentes could hear both sides of the conversation. History of violence? That's interesting. What violence would that be? Military records show multiple incidents of excessive force during your service overseas. Combined with your threats against my clients tonight, we believe there's sufficient cause for concern. Your clients broke an 8-year-old boy's finger with a hammer because he was hungry, and you're worried about my stability? Alleged abuse, Mr. Hall. Nothing has been proven yet, but it will be, along with a few other things I'm going to dig up about your clients. Is that a threat? Dalton's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. Mr. Fisher, let me explain something to you. Your clients have spent 18 months systematically torturing a child in my home. They've turned my wife into an abuser and my daughter into a sociopath. They've destroyed my family from the inside out. And last night, they crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. He paused, letting the silence stretch. So when you ask if that's a threat, the answer is no. It's a promise. I'm going to destroy them. Counselor. Completely, thoroughly, and permanently. And when I'm done, they're going to wish they'd never heard the name Terry Hall. Mr. Hall, I strongly advise you to. Dalton hung up and walked back into the hospital room, where Grace and Officer Fuentes were staring at him with expressions of concern and growing alarm. Gentleman, lady, he said pleasantly, I think we should accelerate our timeline. Terry's going to need protection, and the people who hurt him are already mobilizing their resources. Mr. Hall, Grace said slowly, what exactly are you planning to do? Dalton looked down at Terry, who was starting to wake up from his sedation. The boy's eyes found his immediately, full of trust and love despite everything that had happened. I'm going to be a father, Dalton said simply. The kind Terry should have had from the beginning. What he didn't say, what he couldn't say in front of law enforcement and social services, was that being Terry's father meant protecting him from the people who wanted to hurt him, by any means necessary, even if it meant becoming the monster they claimed he already was. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Preparation. Dalton's construction company occupied a sprawling compound on the outskirts of Millbrook, complete with warehouses, equipment yards, and a main office building that had served as his operational headquarters for 12 years. But the real nerve center of his business was the underground bunker he'd built beneath the main warehouse, a climate-controlled facility that officially didn't exist. 48 hours after Terry's surgery, Dalton sat in that bunker reviewing the files Leland Collins had compiled on the Fitzpatrick family. What he found was even worse than he'd expected. Cornelius Fitzpatrick had a history of fraud dating back 30 years. Real estate schemes, insurance scams, and tax evasion that had somehow never resulted in prosecution. More disturbing were the sealed juvenile records that Leland had managed to access, showing a pattern of cruelty to animals and younger children that had followed Cornelius through his teenage years. Dolores Fitzpatrick had been institutionalized twice for what medical records euphemistically called nervous breakdowns. The actual diagnoses were more specific: antisocial personality disorder with narcissistic tendencies. She'd been released both times after family members, specifically Cornelius, had convinced doctors she was stable enough for outpatient treatment. But it was Marlene's file that made Dalton's blood run cold. The woman he'd married had been married twice before, both marriages ending in suspicious circumstances. Her first husband had died in a hiking accident that insurance investigators had found questionable but not prosecutable. Her second husband had simply disappeared, leaving behind a suicide note that handwriting experts later determined was forged. Terry wasn't the only child Marlene had abandoned. She'd given birth to 3 other children by 3 different fathers, all of whom had been given up for adoption or surrendered to state custody when they became inconvenient. Angel, it seemed, was special not because she was Marlene's daughter, but because she was Cornelius's granddaughter and possibly his biological daughter as well. DNA tests referenced in sealed court documents suggested a relationship that went far beyond the normal grandfather-granddaughter bond. Dalton closed the files and sat back in his chair, trying to process the magnitude of what he'd discovered. He wasn't just dealing with garden-variety family dysfunction. He was dealing with multiple generations of psychopaths who had perfected the art of manipulation and abuse. His phone rang. Terry's voice came through the speaker, small and worried. "Dad, when are you coming home?" "Soon, buddy. How are you feeling?" "My hand hurts, but the nice lady from social services is here, and she's asking lots of questions. She wants to know about the hammer thing." Dalton's grip tightened on the phone. "What have you told her?" "The truth. That mommy hit me because I asked for food." "Dad, am I in trouble?" "No, son. You're not in trouble. You did exactly the right thing by telling the truth. The lady says I might have to go stay somewhere else while they figure things out. I don't want to go away, Dad." "You're not going anywhere, Terry. I promise." After ending the call, Dalton activated the secure communication system he'd installed in the bunker and placed a call to Santos Griffin, a man whose services were both highly illegal and completely necessary for the kind of operation Dalton was planning. "Santos, it's Dalton Hall. I need to activate a priority contract." "What's the scope?" "Full elimination package. For targets, multiple locations. Needs to look accidental. Timeline, 72 hours from start to finish." Santos was quiet for a moment. "That's aggressive, even for us. It's going to cost extra. Money isn't an issue. But I need guarantees. No traces, no survivors, no loose ends." "Understood. Send me the files." As Dalton uploaded the Fitzpatrick information to Santos's encrypted server, he felt a cold satisfaction settling in his chest. The law might move slowly, but justice could be much more efficient when properly motivated. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We know you're planning something. Back off, or Angel disappears forever." Dalton smiled and typed back, "Bring it on, old man. You have no idea what you're dealing with." The response came immediately. "Neither do you. Check your email." Dalton opened his laptop and found a message with video attachments. The first video showed Angel sitting in what appeared to be a hotel room, looking directly at the camera with cold, calculating eyes that were far too old for her 10-year-old face. "Hi, Daddy," she said, her voice sweet and innocent. "Grandpa Cornelius says you're being very unreasonable about Terry. He says maybe you need some motivation to be more cooperative." The second video made Dalton's blood turn to ice water. It showed Terry asleep in his hospital bed, filmed through the window from outside the building. A timestamp showed it had been recorded less than an hour ago. The third video was even more disturbing. Angel stood in Terry's hospital room, looking down at the sleeping boy with an expression of pure malice. "It would be so easy," she whispered to the camera. "All it would take is unplugging one little machine or pressing the wrong button on his foredrip. Poor Terry, so weak and helpless." The video ended with Angel blowing a kiss to the camera. Dalton was out of his chair and moving before the video finished playing. He speed-dialed Leland Collins while grabbing weapons from the concealed arsenal he kept in the bunker. "Lee, I need an immediate extraction team at Millbrook General. My son is in danger." "How immediate?" "Right fucking now." "And Lee, rules of engagement are weapons-free. Anyone who poses a threat to the boy gets eliminated." "Copy that. Team will be on site in 15 minutes. Dalton's next call was to Santos Griffin. "Change of plans. The timeline just moved up to immediate. I don't care what it costs or how messy it gets. I want the Fitzpatrick family eliminated within the next 6 hours. All of them. Dalton thought about Angel's cold eyes, her whispered threats, the casual way she discussed killing Terry. All of them, he confirmed. As Dalton raced toward the hospital, he felt the last vestiges of his civilized nature burning away like paper in a fire. The Fitzpatricks had made a fundamental error in judgment. They'd assumed that threatening Terry would make Dalton more cooperative. Instead, they just signed their own death warrants. The war they'd been fighting in shadows and whispers was about to become very real, very violent, and very final. And unlike them, Dalton didn't fight with psychological games and manipulation. He fought to win. Chapter 5. The Fortress Under Siege. The private security team Leland had deployed around Millbrook General was invisible to casual observers, but immediately apparent to anyone with military training. Dalton counted 6 operatives as he approached the hospital, 2 in the parking lot, 2 at entrances, and 2 roving patrols. Professional, well-armed, and completely focused on protecting one small boy in a third-floor room. But as Dalton entered the hospital, his combat instinct screamed that something was wrong. The normal flow of late-night hospital activity was too quiet, too controlled. Staff members moved with the mechanical precision of people following a script rather than responding to organic situations. Dr. Shannon met him at the elevator, her face pale and strained. "Mr. Hall, thank God you're here. We've had some unusual visitors tonight." "What kind of visitors?" "Official ones. CDC representatives claiming there's been a potential exposure to a communicable disease. They've quarantined Terry's floor and are requiring all personnel to follow special protocols." Dalton felt ice form in his stomach. "CDC? What kind of exposure?" "That's just it. They won't give us any specifics. Just that Terry may have been exposed to something during his time at home, and they need to run additional tests." As the elevator climbed toward the 3rd floor, Dalton processed the implications. The Fitzpatricks had somehow managed to manufacture an official government response that would give them access to Terry while keeping everyone else at a distance. The elevator doors opened to reveal a scene that confirmed his worst fears. The entire floor had been cordoned off with plastic sheeting and warning signs. Personnel in hazmat suits moved through the corridors with the slow precision of people working in a contaminated environment. "Where's my son?" "Room 314. "But Mr. Hall, you'll need to go through decontamination procedures before." Dalton was already moving, pushing through the plastic barriers with the kind of controlled violence that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. Behind him, he could hear Dr. Shannon calling for security, but he knew his own people would handle any interference. Room 314 was at the end of the corridor, isolated from the other patient rooms by additional barriers and warning signs. Through the observation window, Dalton could see Terry lying in bed, unconscious, with multiple 4 lines running into his small body. A figure in a hazmat suit stood beside the bed, adjusting one of the 4 drips. Dalton kicked in the door. The person in the hazmat suit spun around, and even through the protective mask, Dalton could see Angel's bright blue eyes staring back at him with cold amusement. "Hello, Daddy. You're just in time to say goodbye. Get away from him." "Or what? You'll hurt a 10-year-old girl? In front of all these witnesses." Angel gestured toward the observation window, where several medical personnel had gathered to watch the confrontation. Dalton stepped closer, and Angel's hand moved to the 4 control panel. "Did you know that potassium chloride is completely undetectable in postmortem blood work if you don't know to look for it?" Poor Terry, already so weak from his injuries. His little heart just couldn't handle the stress. "Angel, don't do this." "Why not? You never loved me the way you love him. Even before you knew he wasn't your real son, you always chose him over me. Well, now you get to watch him die and know that it's all your fault." Angel's finger hovered over the 4 pump controls. One push would send a lethal dose of potassium directly into Terry's bloodstream. "You're right," Dalton said quietly. "I never loved you the way I love him." Angel's eyes flashed with triumph. Finally, some honesty. Because Terry is good and innocent, and pure. And you, Dalton's voice dropped to a whisper. You're a monster, just like your real father. Angel's hand stilled on the controls. What did you say? Cornelius. Your biological father. I found the DNA tests, Angel. I know what he did to your mother when she was 14. I know what he's been doing to you. For the first time since he'd known her, Angel's mask of cold control slipped. Confusion and pain flickered across her features. You're lying. I'm not. And deep down, you know I'm not. You know why you're different from other children. You know why you feel things differently, why hurting people doesn't bother you the way it should. Angel's hand began to shake. Shut up. He made you into this, Angel. Cornelius and Dolores and your mother. They broke you before you were old enough to understand what was happening. You're not evil because you were born that way. You're evil because they made you that way. Tears began streaming down Angel's face behind the hazmat mask. I can't. Yes, you can. You can choose to be different. You can choose to protect Terry instead of hurting him. Angel looked down at the 4 controls, then at Terry's peaceful face, then back at Dalton. But if I don't do this, Grandpa will be angry. He said he'd make me go away forever if I don't prove I'm worthy. Fuck Grandpa. Fuck all of them. You're 10 years old, Angel. You shouldn't have to prove anything to anyone. Angel's finger moved away from the controls. She looked at Dalton with eyes that suddenly seemed very young and very lost. Daddy, I'm scared. I know, baby. I'm scared too. The observation window exploded inward as Leland Collins and his team breached the room from the outside. Within seconds, the space was filled with tactical operators in full combat gear. Target neutralized, Leland reported. Area is secure. But Dalton was already moving, scooping Angel into his arms despite the hazmat suit she wore. She felt impossibly small and fragile, nothing like the calculating monster who had threatened Terry's life moments before. Sir, one of the operatives reported, we've got multiple bogies approaching from stairwells. Looks like the CDC response was cover for a larger operation. Through the broken window, Dalton could see vehicles approaching the hospital from multiple directions. The Fitzpatricks had marshaled significant resources for what was meant to be the final elimination of both children. Lee, I need extraction for all 3 of us. Now, copy that. Roof access in 60 seconds. As alarms began blaring throughout the hospital, Dalton carefully disconnected Terry from the legitimate medical equipment while leaving the 4 lines that Angel had been using to deliver poison. His son was unconscious but breathing normally. Whatever they'd given him was meant to keep him docile, not kill him outright. Angel, Dalton said, lifting Terry in his arms, we're going to run now. And when we get somewhere safe, you're going to tell me everything about what they've done to you. All of it. Angel nodded, tears still streaming down her face. Will you still love me? Even though I'm bad. Dalton looked into those blue eyes, Cornelius's eyes, and saw not a monster, but a damaged child who had been systematically tortured into becoming something unnatural. You're not bad, Angel. You're broken, and broken things can be fixed. As they ran toward the stairwell that would take them to the roof and safety, Dalton realized that his war with the Fitzpatricks had evolved beyond simple revenge. Now it was about salvation. And unlike the games they'd been playing with psychological manipulation and elaborate schemes, salvation required the complete and utter destruction of everyone who had contributed to Angel's corruption. The Fitzpatricks wanted to play God with children's lives? Dalton was about to show them what real divine justice looked like. Chapter 6. Revelations in Blood. The safe house was a converted hunting lodge 50 miles outside Millbrook, buried deep enough in the pine forest that satellites couldn't get clear imagery and cell phone signals died at the property line. Dalton had purchased it years ago through a shell company, ostensibly as a weekend retreat, but actually as a bolt hole for situations exactly like this one. Terry slept in the master bedroom, monitored by medical equipment that Leland's team had appropriated from the hospital during their extraction. Whatever the Fitzpatricks had given him was wearing off, but slowly. Angel sat curled in a chair beside his bed, still wearing hospital scrubs and watching her brother's face with an expression of guilt and confusion. In the main room, Dalton reviewed the intelligence his team had gathered during the hospital raid. The fake CDC response had been coordinated by Cornelius using contact from his decades of financial fraud, people who specialized in creating official-looking documentation for a price. The plan had been elegant in its simplicity. Isolate Terry, eliminate him using untraceable methods, then claim Angel had been traumatized by witnessing his death from the mysterious exposure. But what disturbed Dalton more than the murder plot was what they'd found in the fake medical equipment. Along with the potassium chloride Angel had been instructed to use, there were syringes filled with what laboratory analysis revealed to be concentrated LSD and methamphetamine. The plan wasn't just to kill Terry. It was to drive Angel insane in the process, creating a witness who would be too psychologically damaged to ever testify coherently about what had happened. Sick bastards, Leland muttered, reading over Dalton's shoulder. Using kids as weapons is bad enough, but this... They've been doing it for years, Dalton replied, showing him Angel's medical records. Look at this. 3 different psychiatric hospitalizations before she turned 8, all for violent outbursts, all followed by periods where she was kept sedated with experimental drugs. They were conditioning her, training her, breaking down her natural empathy, and rebuilding her as a weapon they could point at anyone who threatened them. Dalton's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Santos Griffin. Package delivered. Fitzpatrick compound neutralized. 2 primary targets eliminated. 1 secondary target secured for interrogation. Which one did you keep alive? Dalton typed back. The old woman. Client specified maximum information extraction before disposal. Dalton felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Dolores Fitzpatrick had always been the cruelest of the 3 adults, the one who seemed to take the most pleasure in Terry's suffering. If anyone deserved an extended conversation about consequences, it was her. Angel, he called softly. Can you come here for a minute? Angel looked up from Terry's bedside, her young face still streaked with dried tears. Is he going to be okay? He's going to be fine. But I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Angel approached slowly, her movements carrying the hyper-vigilant caution of someone who had learned that adults could turn violent without warning. Am I in trouble? No, sweetheart. You're safe now. But I need to understand what they did to you, so I can make sure it never happens again. For the next hour, Angel told Dalton things that made him understand why some people believed in hell. The systematic abuse had started when she was 3 years old, psychological conditioning designed to make her view cruelty as normal and kindness as weakness. Cornelius had used a combination of rewards and punishments to shape her behavior, praising her when she hurt others and withdrawing affection when she showed compassion. The sexual abuse had started when she was 5. The drug experiments had begun at 6. By the time she was 8, Angel had been transformed into something that wasn't quite human anymore. A perfectly programmed sociopath who could mimic emotions but not feel them, who understood manipulation but not love, who knew how to inflict pain but not how to experience genuine pleasure. They said I was special, Angel whispered, her voice hollow. They said normal people were weak, and I was strong because I could do things they couldn't do. What kinds of things? Hurt people without feeling bad about it. Lie without getting nervous. Watch someone cry and not want to help them. Dalton felt something break inside his chest. Angel, you know that's not normal, right? You know that feeling bad when you hurt someone is actually a good thing. Angel nodded slowly. I think I used to know that before, but it's been so long since I felt anything real that I forgot what it was like. Do you want to remember? Can I? Or am I broken forever? Dalton looked into those blue eyes, Cornelius's eyes, and saw something that gave him hope. Behind the calculated coldness, behind the programmed responses, there was still a spark of something genuine, something that could be nurtured back to life with enough time and care. Nobody's broken forever, Angel, but it's going to take work and it's going to hurt sometimes. Are you willing to try? Angel nodded, and for the first time since he'd known her, her expression looked authentically hopeful. What about Grandpa and Grandma and Mommy? When they find out I didn't kill Terry, they're going to be very angry. Dalton's smile was gentle, but his eyes were absolutely merciless. Angel, You don't need to worry about them anymore. They're never going to hurt you or Terry or anyone else ever again. What happened to them? Justice. Before Angel could ask for clarification, Dalton's secure phone rang. Santos Griffin's voice came through the encrypted connection, professional and emotionless. Target Dolores is ready for client interview. Location secure, privacy guaranteed. Dalton looked at Angel, who was watching him with the sharp intelligence that had made her such an effective weapon. Angel, I need to go take care of some business. Leland is going to stay here with you and Terry. If you need anything at all, you tell him, okay? Are you going to hurt Grandma Dolores? The question was asked with clinical curiosity rather than emotional concern, and Dalton realized that Angel's recovery was going to be a long and complicated process. I'm going to have a conversation with her about the things she's done, and then I'm going to make sure she can never do them again. Angel nodded as if this was perfectly reasonable. Can I come with you? No, sweetheart. That's not something you need to see, but I want to watch. I want to see what happens to people who hurt children. The request was delivered in a tone of innocent curiosity that made Dalton's skin crawl. Even knowing what had been done to her, even understanding that she was a victim rather than a perpetrator, Angel's casual approach to violence was deeply disturbing. Angel, one of the things we're going to work on is understanding the difference between justice and revenge. Justice is about protecting people and making sure bad things don't happen again. Revenge is about making people suffer because it feels good. What are you going to do to Grandma? Justice, Dalton said firmly. And you're going to stay here and take care of Terry, because that's what good sisters do. As Dalton prepared to leave, Angel's voice stopped him at the door. Daddy, yeah. Thank you for not giving up on me. Dalton looked back at the damaged child who had nearly murdered her brother just hours before, and felt his resolve crystallize into something unbreakable. I will never give up on you, Angel. No matter what you've done, no matter what you might do, you're my daughter, and I love you. Angel smiled, the first genuine expression of joy he'd ever seen on her face. I love you too, Daddy. For real this time. As Dalton drove toward his final confrontation with Dolores Fitzpatrick, he reflected on the strange mathematics of justice. 3 adults had systematically tortured and corrupted 2 children over the course of years. 2 of those adults were already dead. The third was about to learn what it felt like to be completely helpless and at the mercy of someone stronger. It wasn't revenge. It was balance. And unlike the games the Fitzpatricks had played with psychological manipulation and elaborate schemes, balance required absolute finality. Chapter 7. The Last Confession. The abandoned grain silo stood like a concrete monument to decay on the outskirts of the county, its bulk casting long shadows across fields that had been fallow for 20 years. Santos Griffin had chosen the location for its acoustic properties. Sound didn't carry, and the thick walls muffled even the loudest screams. Dalton found Dolores Fitzpatrick exactly where Santos had left her, suspended by her wrist from a chain that disappeared into the shadows above. At 70 years old, she looked fragile and pathetic hanging there in her blood-stained nightgown, but Dalton felt no pity. This woman had orchestrated the systematic torture of children for decades. Hello, Dolores. Her head snapped up, eyes focusing on him with a mixture of fear and defiance. Despite her situation, she still carried herself with the arrogant bearing of someone who believed she was inherently superior to the people around her. You can't do this, she gasped, her voice hoarse from screaming. I'm an old woman. I have rights. So did Terry. So did Angel. So did all the other children you've destroyed over the years. Dalton circled her slowly, cataloging the damage Santos had already inflicted. Professional work. Painful enough to ensure cooperation, but not so severe as to cause unconsciousness or shock. I found the records, Dolores. All of them. Hospital admissions, juvenile court documents, Child Protective Services reports going back 40 years. You and Cornelius have been in the business of breaking children for longer than I've been alive. Those children were problems. Defective. We were trying to fix them. Fix them? You turned your own daughter into a serial killer. You conditioned your granddaughter to be a sociopathic weapon. You convinced my wife to torture an 8-year-old boy because he was hungry. Dolores's laugh was bitter, unrepentant. Marlene was always weak. She needed guidance to reach her full potential. Her full potential was breaking a child's finger with a hammer. Her full potential was understanding that some people matter and others don't. That bloodlines determine worth. That strength means being willing to eliminate weakness wherever you find it. Dalton felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Even now, even hanging helpless and broken, Dolores showed no remorse, no recognition that what she'd done was evil. She was a true believer in her own twisted philosophy. Where are the other children? What other children? Dalton picked up a pair of bolt cutters from the table Santos had prepared. Dolores, I've read the records. Marlene gave birth to 4 children before Angel. 3 of them disappeared from official records after being placed in your care. I want to know where they are. Dead, she said simply. They were defective, weak. They served their purpose and were disposed of. What purpose? Practice. Angel needed subjects to work with as her training progressed. The others were expendable. Dalton had thought himself prepared for the depths of the Fitzpatrick family's evil. But this casual admission of child murder made him understand that he was dealing with something beyond simple cruelty. This was organized, systematic genocide against anyone the family deemed unworthy of life. How many children have you killed? Killed? We improved them. We gave their meaningless lives purpose by using them to create something better. The bolt cutters closed around Dolores's ring finger with a wet crunch. Her scream echoed off the concrete walls like the cry of a damned soul. How many? 17, she gasped between sobs. 17 over 30 years. Foster children, mostly. Runaways. Children no one would miss. And Angel participated. Angel was our masterpiece. By the time she was 7, she could inflict more psychological damage than most adults. She had a gift for finding exactly what someone feared most and using it against them. Dalton moved the bolt cutters to her middle finger. What was the plan for Terry? The plan was to break him completely, then use him as Angel's final test. If she could kill someone she'd lived with for years without feeling remorse, she would have been ready for larger operations. Larger operations? Missing persons cases, unsolved murders, people who disappear without a trace because someone with Angel's skills decided they were unnecessary. The middle finger joined the ring finger on the concrete floor. Dolores's voice had become a continuous whimper punctuated by gasps of pain. What about the plan for me? You were an obstacle. Marlene never loved you, you know. She married you for your money and your property, but she always intended to eliminate you once your usefulness ended. Ow! Hunting accident. You were going to be found dead on your own property, killed by a stray bullet during deer season. Very tragic. Very accidental. And then what? And then Marlene would inherit everything, take Angel, and disappear. We had new identities prepared, new lives arranged. Angel would have grown up to be perfect, beautiful, intelligent, completely without conscience. Dalton set down the bolt cutters and picked up a medical scalpel from Santos's collection of tools. Dolores, I want you to understand something. You're going to die here tonight. That's not a threat or a negotiation. It's a simple fact. The only question is how much you suffer before it happens. You can't murder an old woman in cold blood. You're not like us. You're right. I'm not like you. Dalton's voice was quiet, conversational. You torture children because you enjoy it. I'm going to torture you because you deserve it. The scalpel found the soft skin at the base of her throat, drawing a thin line of blood without severing anything vital. Tell me about Angel's training. For the next hour, Dolores told Dalton things that would have broken a weaker man's sanity. The systematic psychological conditioning, the sexual abuse masked as lessons about power dynamics, the drug experiments designed to enhance Angel's natural sociopathic tendencies. By the time she was 8 years old, Angel had been transformed into something that wasn't quite human, a perfect predator with the appearance of an innocent child. The beautiful part, Dolores whispered, her voice growing weak from blood loss, was that she enjoyed it. By the end, Angel looked forward to her lessons. She begged us to let her practice on new subjects. Because you programmed her to enjoy it. Because we unlocked her true nature. Deep down, everyone is a predator. We just had the courage to embrace that truth. Dalton stepped back and studied Dolores's ruined form. She was dying slowly, blood pooling beneath her suspended body, but her eyes still held that cold certainty that she was right and the rest of the world was weak. Any last words? Angel will never be normal. You can try to fix her, but the programming goes too deep. Sooner or later, she'll revert to what we made her. And when she does, she'll kill you first. Dalton considered this, then nodded slowly. Maybe, but at least she'll have the choice. That's more than you ever gave her. The final cut was quick and merciful. More mercy than Dolores Fitzpatrick had ever shown a child in her 70 years of life. As Dalton walked away from the grain silo, leaving behind the corpse of the last Fitzpatrick family member, he felt a strange sense of completion. The immediate threat to his children was over. The people who had tormented Terry and corrupted Angel would never hurt anyone again. But as he drove through the darkness toward home, Dolores's final words echoed in his mind. Angel's recovery would be a long and uncertain process. The damage done to her psyche ran deeper than any physical wound, and there was no guarantee that love and patience would be enough to heal it. Still, he had to try, because unlike the Fitzpatricks, Dalton believed that people could choose to be better than their worst impulses, even if that choice had to be made every day for the rest of their lives. Even if the alternative was becoming the very monsters they'd fought so hard to defeat. Chapter 8. The Reckoning's Price. 6 months after the grain silo, Dalton stood in the kitchen of his rebuilt home, watching his children eat breakfast together for the first time in their lives. Terry's right hand was still weak from the surgery to repair his finger, but he could grip a fork well enough to eat scrambled eggs. Angel sat across from him, carefully cutting her pancakes into precise squares and studying her brother's face with the intense focus of someone learning to read human emotions for the first time. "Terry," Angel said suddenly, her voice carrying the careful cadence of someone practicing conversation. "I want to say I'm sorry again for what I almost did at the hospital." Terry looked up from his eggs, his brown eyes serious but not afraid. The boy had a remarkable capacity for forgiveness that Dalton both admired and worried about. "I know you're sorry, Angel, and I forgive you, but—" Terry hesitated, searching for words. "Why did you want to hurt me?" Angel set down her fork and considered the question with the same methodical approach she once brought to planning cruelties. "Because they taught me that hurting people meant I was strong, and being strong meant I was good. But I think they were wrong about that." "How do you know they were wrong?" "Because when I was going to hurt you, I felt empty inside, like I was just a machine doing what I was programmed to do. But when Daddy said he still loved me even though I was broken, I felt something different, something that made me want to be better instead of just being strong." Dalton felt his chest tighten with pride and sorrow. Angel's recovery was progressing, but it was a fragile thing built on conscious choice rather than natural instinct. Every day, she had to decide to be human instead of the weapon the Fitzpatricks had created. "Dad," Terry said, "Dr. Shannon wants to know if we're ready to go back to school next week. Are you ready?" Terry shrugged with the resilience of childhood. "I guess. But Angel says she's scared." Dalton looked at Angel, who was staring down at her plate with the expression of someone wrestling with thoughts too complex for her age. "What are you scared of, sweetheart?" "I'm scared that when other kids are mean to me, I'll remember how to be mean back. Really mean, and I won't be able to stop myself." It was a legitimate fear. Angel's psychological conditioning had been thorough, and stress could trigger relapses into her programmed responses. But isolation wasn't the answer. She needed to learn how to function in normal social situations. "We'll take it slow," Dalton said. "Start with half days, build up gradually. And if you feel those old thoughts coming back, you can find me immediately." Angel nodded, but Dalton could see the doubt in her eyes. She wanted to be normal, but she didn't trust herself to stay that way. Dalton's phone rang, displaying Detective Emmett Church's number. Church had been the lead investigator on the Fitzpatrick case, and while he'd never found enough evidence to pursue charges related to their deaths, he'd been helpful in sorting out the legal aftermath. "Morning, Detective." "Dalton, we need to talk. Can you come down to the station?" "What's this about?" new information about your case, and some questions that need answering. An hour later, Dalton sat across from Detective Church in an interview room that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Church was a good cop, thorough, fair, and smart enough to know when he was dealing with something bigger than his small-town department could handle. The FBI crime lab finished analyzing the Fitzpatrick property. Church began setting a thick file on the table between them. What they found: Jesus, Dalton, I've been a cop for 25 years, and I've never seen anything like it. What kind of thing? Bodies. 17 of them, buried in various locations around the compound. Children, mostly, ranging in age from 6 to 14, all showing signs of systematic torture and abuse. Dalton felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Dolores had been telling the truth about the scope of their crimes. Any identification on the victims? That's the thing. Most of them were never officially reported missing. Foster kids who aged out of the system, runaways from broken homes, children whose disappearances were written off as voluntary departures. Church opened the file and spread out crime scene photographs that made Dalton's stomach clench despite everything he'd seen and done. The FBI profiler thinks we're looking at 3 generations of organized killers. A family business built around child trafficking, torture, and murder. The scale of it is unprecedented. What do you need from me? Church leaned back in his chair and studied Dalton's face with the calculating gaze of someone trying to read a suspect. I need to understand how you knew to look for this. Your initial report mentioned systematic abuse, but you seem to know there were deeper crimes involved. How? Dalton had prepared for this question. Military intelligence training. I learned to recognize patterns of organized criminal behavior. And your response was to immediately secure your children and disappear into the woods. My response was to protect my family by any means necessary. Church nodded slowly. Understandable. But here's what bothers me, Dalton. 3 people died in what appears to be a professional hit. Cornelius and Marlene were found shot execution style, and Dolores disappeared completely. Someone with serious skills and serious resources wanted the Fitzpatrick family eliminated. Maybe someone else figured out what they were doing. Maybe. Or maybe someone decided to handle the problem through extrajudicial means. The accusation hung in the air between them like smoke. Church knew, or at least suspected, that Dalton had been involved in the Fitzpatrick's deaths. But knowing and proving were 2 different things. Detective, are you questioning me as a witness or as a suspect? I'm questioning you as a father who had every reason to want these people dead, and who has the skills to make that happen without leaving evidence. Dalton met Church's gaze steadily. Those people tortured my son and turned my daughter into a weapon. If I'd killed them, I wouldn't lose a minute of sleep over it. But you're saying you didn't? I'm saying that justice took care of the problem. How it happened is less important than the fact that it did happen. Church closed the file and sat back. The FBI wants to interview Angel about her experiences with the family. They think she might have information about other victims or accomplices. Absolutely not. Dalton, she's the only living witness to. She's a 10-year-old girl who's trying to recover from systematic psychological torture. I won't have federal agents traumatizing her all over again for the sake of an investigation. What if there are other children out there? Other victims who could be saved? Dalton considered this. It was possible that the Fitzpatricks had accomplices, other family members or associates who were continuing their work. But Angel's mental health had to be the priority. I'll talk to her. If she remembers anything that could help other children, I'll contact you immediately. But no official interviews, no depositions, no courtroom testimony. Church nodded reluctantly. Fair enough. But Dalton, if you know something about how the Fitzpatricks died, now will be the time to share it. The FBI isn't going to be as understanding as I am. I appreciate the warning, Detective, but some stories are better left untold. As Dalton drove home, he thought about the delicate balance he was trying to maintain. His children were safe, the immediate threat was over, and the truth about the Fitzpatrick's crimes was finally coming to light. But Angel's recovery was fragile, and any disruption could trigger a relapse into her programmed responses. The federal investigation would continue, and eventually, more questions would be asked. But by then, Dalton hoped, Angel would be strong enough to handle the truth about what her family had done and what he had done to stop them. Until then, he would do what he'd always done, protect his children by any means necessary, even if it meant keeping secrets that could destroy them all. Chapter 9. The New Foundation. 1 year later, Dalton stood in the doorway of Angel's bedroom, watching her sleep peacefully for the first time since he'd known her. Gone were the night terrors, the violent outbursts, the calculating coldness that had made her seem far older than her years. In sleep, she looked like what she was, an 11-year-old girl who was finally learning how to be a child. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. Months of intensive therapy, careful medication to rebalance brain chemistry damaged by years of abuse, and constant vigilance to prevent relapses into programmed behaviors. But slowly, incrementally, Angel was becoming human again. She'd made her first real friend at school 3 months ago, a shy girl named Rosa who shared Angel's love of reading and seemed immune to the social dynamics that confused and frustrated Angel. Watching them together, Dalton could see Angel practicing empathy like someone learning a foreign language, carefully observing Rosa's emotional responses and trying to mirror them. It was artificial at first, but gradually becoming more natural. Terry had adapted with the remarkable resilience of childhood, though he still flinched sometimes when adults raised their voices unexpectedly. The physical therapy for his hand was progressing well, and Dr. Shannon predicted he'd have full function within another year. More importantly, the psychological damage seemed to be healing. Terry was laughing again, playing with other children, showing interest in normal 8-year-old activities. But it was the relationship between the siblings that gave Dalton the most hope. Angel had appointed herself Terry's protector with the same methodical dedication she'd once brought to planning cruelties. When bullies targeted Terry for his damaged hand, Angel intervened with calculated precision. Not violence, but psychological manipulation that left the aggressors uncertain and unsettled. She was using her weapons for protection instead of destruction. "Dad!" Terry's voice came from behind him. The boy stood in the hallway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, buddy. Just checking on your sister. She was crying earlier, during dinner." "Crying?" "Happy crying, I think. When you told her about the college fund you set up. She went to her room after, and I heard her crying, but when I asked if she was okay, she said she was just feeling grateful." Dalton felt his chest tighten with emotion. Angel's tears had been one of the last things to return as her emotional range expanded. For months, she'd been unable to cry even when she wanted to, her natural responses suppressed by years of conditioning. The fact that she could now experience and express gratitude was a milestone worth celebrating. "Terry, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." "Okay. Are you happy here? With Angel and me? Do you feel safe?" Terry considered the question with the seriousness he brought to all important matters. "I feel safer than I ever have. And Angel, she's different now. Better. She takes care of me instead of trying to hurt me. Do you forgive her? For what she almost did at the hospital?" "I forgave her a long time ago, Dad. She was sick then, and now she's getting better. People shouldn't be punished forever for things they did when they were sick." The wisdom in those words, coming from a 9-year-old boy who had every reason to hold grudges, reminded Dalton why Terry was worth protecting at any cost. "What about me, Terry? Do you forgive me for not protecting you better from the beginning?" Terry's expression grew puzzled. "Forgive you for what? You saved us. You got rid of the bad people and kept Angel and me safe. But I should have seen what was happening sooner. I should have stopped it before it got so bad." Terry stepped forward and hugged Dalton with the fierce devotion that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. "Dad, you did everything right. You just had to figure out who the real bad guys were first." As they stood together in the hallway, Angel's door opened and she emerged, hair mussed from sleep and eyes bright with the intelligence that had once been used as a weapon. "Are we having a family meeting without me?" she asked, her tone carrying the light sarcasm she'd been experimenting with as her personality developed. "Just checking on everyone before bed," Dalton said. Angel studied his face with the perceptiveness that remained her most pronounced characteristic. "You're worried about something. What is it?" Dalton had learned not to lie to Angel. Her ability to detect deception was too refined, and honesty was crucial to maintaining the trust that formed the foundation of her recovery. Detective Church called earlier. The FBI investigation into your grandparents' crimes is expanding. They might want to interview you at some point. Angel's face went through a series of micro-expressions as she processed this information. Fear, anger, calculation, and finally something that looked like resolution. Will you be there with me? Every second. Will they try to make me go back to being the way I was before? No, sweetheart. They just want to understand what happened so they can help other children who might be in similar situations. Angel nodded slowly. I think I'd like to help other children. If I can. Are you sure? It might be difficult to talk about those things. I'm sure. Because now I know the difference between hurting people and helping them. And I want to choose helping. Terry reached for Angel's hand, and she took it without hesitation. Another milestone in her journey back to humanity. We'll do it together, Terry said. Like a family. Like a real family, Angel corrected. The kind that protects each other instead of hurting each other. As Dalton tucked his children back into their beds, he reflected on the strange mathematics of justice and redemption. 3 evil people had died to save 2 innocent ones. A lifetime of programming had been slowly, carefully undone through love and patience. A damaged child was learning to choose humanity over the monstrous nature she'd been given. It wasn't a perfect solution. Angel would always carry scars from her early conditioning, and there would be moments when her old responses surfaced. Terry would always remember the cruelty he'd experienced, even if he chose to forgive it. And Dalton would always know that he'd crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. But they were alive, they were safe, and they were learning to be a real family. That was more than he'd dared hope for during those dark months when the Fitzpatricks had seemed untouchable. As Dalton settled into his own bed, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The children of monsters don't have to become monsters themselves. Thank you for proving that. S.G. Santos Griffin, checking in from whatever shadows he now occupied. The message was deleted immediately, but its meaning lingered. Dalton had saved 2 children.